What's up guys, ATCG here, welcome back to Yugioh Deck of the Day. Today we have an Ojama deck profile. This is definitely the Chaz set, Blazing Vortex. Not only did it give us support for Armed Dragon, which is the main part of why they think this set is a Chaz set, but don't forget we also got a new Ojama card which helps the deck by far. You can implement this deck with pretty much anything you want. You can either play a pure version of the deck, you can play stuff with ABCs, you can play Armed Dragons. The deck has the tools to be played with anything because Konami has purposely tried to make it so that the deck can actually work with any of Chaz's decks. But this is more of a pure version of the deck I'm trying to make here, so if you have any suggestions for a pure deck, you can leave them down below. I tried to keep the deck as more of a deck that needs its win condition in order to pop off, because you can play stuff like Tri-Brigades because they're beasts, you can play stuff like Dragoon because they're very easy to summon with because you have a lot of ways to get monsters on the field. But I tried to make the deck as faithful to the actual win condition as I possibly could, which is locking your opponent's monster zone so they cannot play. This is what the deck is supposed to do, so this is why I tried to make this with this build. So before we begin, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So to start off with the monsters, we played 2 copies of Ojama Yellow, 2 copies of Ojama Black, and 2 copies of Ojama Green. I've seen lists maxing these out, and I don't really think that's necessary because you can get them on your hand very easily with Ojama Magic. If you play stuff like Dragoon, then maxing them out is not a bad idea, because if you open a lot of vanillas in your hand, then you can normal summon one, go into Link Spider, special summon another one, go into another Link Spider, and go into Anaconda this way. But in this build I'm not playing Dragoon, so this is why I don't think I need to play 3 of them. Actually they would be bricky if I played 3, because unless you have Ojama Red in your hand, then having a lot of Ojamas in your hand is actually bricky, unless you also have the polymerization in order to go for the fusion, but this is not something that can happen every single time. So this is why I think if you play a pure version of the deck, 2 copies of each is perfectly fine. The new card we got in Blazing Vortex, 3 copies of Ojama Pink. This card solves a lot of issues of the deck. First of all, it solves the problem of having to run cards like Dark Word Dealings and Hand Distraction in the deck. Before, we needed stuff like that in order to get Ojama Magic in the grave because we didn't have a consistent way of getting it out of our hand. This card is just so good because if it's sent from the hand or field to the grave, it has the Dark Word Dealings effect that both players draw a card and discard one. And also, if you discarded an Ojama card with this effect, you can make one of your opponent's monster zones unusable for 1 turn. So what this does is not only gives you access to Ojama Magic's effect, but it also helps you lock 1 more monster zone, which is crucial because before, if you use something like Ojama Knight and Ground Collapse, your opponent would still have 1 monster zone left, and there are some decks that can't play with just 1 monster zone and the extra monster zone. And also if you summon like Ojama King, then 2 monster zones and the extra monster zone are all every deck needs in order to be able to play. But this 1 more unusable monster zone because of this card's effect is so important to lock your opponent for 1 turn and then hopefully OTK them during the next turn, because this deck spams a lot because you can get a lot of monsters in your hand with a lot of stuff, Ojama Raid being the main one. And this also can be used with Almiraz because it's an Ojama, it has 0 attack points, so you could just worst case scenario normal summon it, go into Almiraz and then use its effect, and if you have an Ojama Magic then you can potentially do the full combo this way if you have a Poly or a King of the Swamp to search Poly. So this is why this card helps the deck a lot. I'm not sure exactly how this card functions in other versions of the deck with ABC. I haven't really tested an ABC version, but I know it is a lot better than this version, but like I said, I tried to make of a pure Ojama deck as possible, so this is why you're not seeing any Armed Dragons or any ABCs in this particular build. 3 copies of Ojama Red, this is the card that gets you access to all of the Ojamas in your hand, because if you search the Ojamas, if you don't have Poly, then they don't really do anything, but if you have this card that can special summon up to 4 Ojama monsters from your hand, they don't have to be different names, so even if you had a duplicate in your hand and you search the second copy with Ojama Magic, you can get all of them out of your hand, and by spamming this way, you can go into Link Spiders, you can go into Nightmares, then climb into Boral Sword, so you can OTK your opponent. This is basically a win condition. You try to make your opponent not being able to play for 1 turn because you've locked their monster zones, and then you try to OTK them. And you don't have to go into Boral Sword anyway because of Ojama Country. You can actually make a lot of big monsters, but we'll get to that a little bit later once I get to the spells. 3 copies of Rescue Cat, insanely good in this deck. You have to play it because you cannot play Obedience School. In order to play Obedience School in this deck, you have to play something like Ojama Blue, because unfortunately Obedience School summons effect monsters and it summons monsters with different names. So if you play Ojama Blue, then yes, Obedience School is live, but Ojama Blue I think is such a slow card for today's meta because it has to be destroyed by battle. If you could destroy it on your own with some way, then yes, it would be very good because it would search you 2 cards, but just waiting for your opponent to destroy by battle is not optimal. So this card is a better normal summon by just getting you 2 monsters out of your deck, which is insane for this deck because being level 2, you can actually do a really cool play that I'm going to talk about once I get to the extra deck. 3 copies of Summoner Monk gives you access to Rescue Cat. You play so many spells in your deck that you don't really need, and if you just open Ojama Magic, then you can use this with Summoner Monk, or if you just open multiple copies of Ojama Country, you don't need more than 1 because you just need 1 on the field to get effect multiple times and also boost your monsters. So redundant spells in the deck is something that the deck is known for, so you don't really mind playing something like Summoner Monk in the deck. 3 copies of King of the Swamp. If you want to play a fusion version of the deck, I think you have to play King of the Swamp, because not only does it give you access to a polymerization, but it also gives you a free material for King of the Swamp, no, for Ojama King actually. King of the Swamp gives you a free material for Ojama King, because if you cannot get Ojamagic and you cannot get all 3 Ojamas in your hand, but maybe you have a way to get access to 2 of them, then King of the Swamp can act as a third monster, because Ojama King requires specific material, so you can use King of the Swamp's second effect for that. Unfortunately, you cannot use King of the Swamp for Ojama Knight, because Ojama Knight requires any 2 Ojama monsters. That would have been really good if we could use that, but unfortunately we can't. But still, I think it's a really good card to play in a deck that you try to actually use the deck's win condition. For the spells, play 3 copies of Ojamagic. This card is so much better now because of Ojama Ping. Before, this card can sometimes be a break, because if you didn't have one of the hard-drawn spells like Hunt Distraction or Dark Word Dealings that were not searchable, then this card would be completely dead. Unfortunately, you cannot play something like Foolish Burial Goods to use this, because it has to be sent from the hand or field to the grave. It cannot be sent from the deck, so you have to draw it or search it and then get it to the grave without Ojama Ping being really hard sometimes, but now it's very consistent and you can get access to all 3 of your Ojamas very quickly. 3 copies of Ojama Country. This is the beatdown card. This card is the one that helps you get over monsters, because it switches the attack and defense of all monsters on the field when you control an Ojama. Ojamas, of course, have 0 attack, but they have really high defense, especially the extra deck monsters, so you just use these to beat down your opponent's monsters. And it also has an effect that you can discard an Ojama card to special summon an Ojama monster from your grave, so you can use this with Ojamagic to get more searches and also get something back from the grave, so this is really good card. 3 copies of Polymerization. You have to max it out if you're playing this deck in a pure version, because without Poly, you cannot really lock your opponent's monster zones, because the fusion monsters are the ones that lock a lot of monster zones. You could use something like Ground Collapse, and you could use Ojama Pink. That would only lead to 3 monster zones being unusable, and 2 monster zones, I think, are pretty enough in order for your opponent to destroy you, so this is why you have to rely on the fusion monsters. 3 copies of Ground Collapse. This complements the strategy of the deck so well, because just Ojama King is not enough. Maybe if you can combo Ojama King with an Ojama Pink, then yes, that's good enough, but Ground Collapse just helps you so much. Unfortunately, it's unsearchable, but still it's something that if you draw, you can actually make the win condition of the deck a little bit more consistent, so this is why this card's here. 3 copies of Tri-White. This is a soul charge for the deck. You special summon 3 level 2 or lower normal monsters from the grave. You special summon all of the Ojama Vanillas back from the grave, because you can get them in the grave very easily, either by fusioning them or using them as Xyz or Link material, and by bringing them all back, you get a lot of monsters on the field. This is why I said that it's not really hard to OTK with this deck. You just have to make sure your opponent doesn't do anything, because this deck cannot really play around anything. So the goal of the deck is to go first, hopefully make your opponent's monster zones unusable, mostly all of them. Even if you leave one, that's fine, because I don't think there are a lot of decks that can play with only one main monster zone and the extra monster zone, unless you're playing like a very control-y deck. So after that, you can just OTK them by special summoning a lot of monsters on the field, and Tri-White helps you do that. And for the one-offs, play 1 instant fusion, because fortunately, Ojama Knight can be special summoned with instant fusion. So not only that, but with the Ojama Link monster, you don't really care that Ojama Knight will be destroyed in the end phase, because you link him away anyway, and then you bring him back from the grave, so he stays on the field, and you can use his effect, because he doesn't have to be fusion summoned or anything, just have to bring it on the field. 1 copy of Terraforming for Ojama Country, 1 copy of Monster Reborn, a little bit more revival, and 1 copy of Call by the Grave, because it hurts a lot when Ojamagic can't get asked, because you need these 3 monsters in your hand in order to do the play, especially if you go for the fusion play, and because Ash is such a good card this format, and there are a lot of other cards that can actually hurt Ojamagic, Call by the Grave, I think you have to play it. For the extra deck, for the fusion monsters, we play 1 copy of Ojama King. I don't think you need to play more than 1. It's highly unlikely that you will go into more than 1, because you have to use Ojamagic's effect twice. In order to do that, you have to have none of the Ojama monsters in your opening hand, and also need to get access to 2 polymerizations, so I don't think this will ever happen. It's better to just leave space for other stuff, because Ojama King is a monster that you don't really summon too often, but when you do summon, then it will win you the game when you combine it with either Ground Collapse or Ojama Pink. 2 copies of Ojama Knight. This actually gives you a lot more access to the easy part of the deck, because you can summon it with instant fusion first of all, and you don't need 3 specific monsters in order to summon it. So if you see any 2 Ojamas, because you can get them out with Rescue Cat, Summoner Monk can get a Rescue Cat, and you play 6 copies of Polymerization, then it's very easy to summon this. And you also have a 7th way with instant fusion, because you summon it and then you link it away, then you bring it back, then it's very easy to get it on the field and stick it on the field, so you can actually lock your opponent. For the Xyz monsters, I play 1 Sky Cavalier Centauria and 1 Zeus Sky Thunder. So this combo is something that I've been using in quite a lot of decks. So if you play anything from a rank 3 to a rank 4, you have stuff like Nightmare Shark, you have Heartland Draco. For rank 1s, you have Assembled Nightingale, but rank 2s didn't really have something to attack directly, but they do have Centauria, and it's basically the same. It's a monster that protects itself and just battles, and then you can use it as material for Zeus, and then Zeus can just nuke the field. So this is basically the exact same strategy. So any kind of rank number has a way to get to Zeus, and if you have access to Zeus, I think you should be playing it, because yes, you can play stuff like Sundial Sundayu, but Sundayu doesn't really do much for the deck. It's just a monster that will give you a beater on the field, while Zeus is something that you can either nuke your opponent's board right away when you summon it, or if you don't have to do it right away, you can leave it on the field with 2 materials as disruption, and using during your opponent's turn, you can actually destroy that entire board. Unfortunately, in this particular decks, you cannot summon them. You cannot summon Zeus with more than 2 materials because you're not playing Zodiac, so yep, you can only use its effect once, which is fair, I think, because Zeus in Zodiac is not that fair. This is the fair part when you summon it using its effect only once, unless you actually use Zeus's second effect to get itself materials, but that doesn't happen too often because, let's be real, this effect is actually not that good. And for the Link monsters, play 2 copies of Ojama Emperor. This is the Link monster. I think a lot of people have forgotten about this card because when they play a deck like with Ojama ABC or Armed Dragon, they don't really use this card, but this card is really good. So first of all, it requires 3 beast monsters, including an Ojama monster. Unfortunately, it needs 3 monsters because you cannot really use something like a Mrs. Radiant and linking away monsters and bringing something back in order to use Mrs. Radiant in that one monster. It has to be 3 monsters. This is the unfortunate part. But this card, when you have Ojama country on the field, it gains 3000 attack and it can be destroyed by card effects. And also you can catch your opponents off guard because it says that your opponent takes any battle damage for you would have taken from attacks on this card, because this dimension wall effect can actually win you some games, because if you're getting to a grind game and your opponent has managed to survive with a couple of life points, just summoning this with 0 attack points and attacking to a monster that has a lot of attack points can win you the game because of this effect. And also you can target a non-linked Ojama monster in your grave to special summon it, and it locks you from the extra deck for the rest of the turn for fusion monsters. So you can special summon Ojama Knight back this way, so this is why instant fusion is such a good card, because you don't care that it would be destroyed during the end phase, because it will not. You will just use it as link material and then bring it back with Ojama Emperor, and then you can actually get it on the field and it will stay on the field. And this card also gives you access back to anything of Ojamas you need, and it gives you a beater because 3000 is a respectable monster and you cannot get to Boros Sword every single game, so this is why this card is actually a really good card. And I think 2 copies are enough. You will hardly ever summon a third one, but the second one comes up a lot. And for the list of Link monsters, play anything that could actually give the deck some kind of utility, because the deck is very limited to what it can do, so you rely on the extra deck in order to do more plays. So 1 copy of Almiraz. I said this before, because of pink, this card is so good. Ojamas have 0 attack points, so you can use them for Almiraz, and pink needs to be sent from the hand or field to the grave to use its effect, so this is why you need to play 1 copy of Almiraz. 1 copy of Link Spider to give you access to Nightmare Arrows, because you play a lot of vanillas, and with Ojama Red you can special summon a lot of vanillas from your hand, so having this 1 Link Spider and then go into Nightmare is actually really good. 1 copy of Masquerena. I'll be starting to play this card more and more in pretty much anything now because of Blazing Vortex. I'm going to talk about one specific card a little bit later, but this card is actually so much better now, because before you would either use this for a Nightmare Unicorn, which was not very optimal, you would use it for an Appaloosa, which would end up having only 2 or 3 negates max, but now you actually have a really good disruption. I'll show you a little later. For the Nightmares, I play 1 Phoenix and 1 Unicorn. I couldn't fit Cerberus in the deck because the extra deck is a little bit tight, because you need to play some engine cards and then you have to have the utility cards, but Cerberus right now isn't that great. These 2 are just much better. 1 copy of Appaloosa and 1 copy of Boros Sword for the Link Force. These cards actually can be summoned rather easily, surprisingly, this deck, because of Ojama Red, because you can get so many monsters on the field very easily, and you play stuff like Tri-White, which gets you a lot of monsters. You can either use them turn 1, because you usually want to summon Appaloosa turn 1, and then go into Boros Sword afterwards, so you can OTK your opponent, so you can actually summon these cards very easily in the deck. And the card that I think is going to get a lot of hype from Blazing Vortex, do not sleep on this card, is Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. This Link 5 monster is absolutely insane because it combos with Masquerena. At least it does in the OCG. It hasn't been confirmed yet in the TCG, but I think it makes sense that if it happens in the OCG, it is possible to happen in the TCG as well. So you can use one of your opponent's monsters to link summon this card, and this also triggers with Masquerena. So your Masquerena is a disruption because you don't have to summon a unicorn to get rid of one of your opponent's monsters. You can actually link them away as a mechanic. So this needs 4+ effect monsters. So you have to use 4 monsters. So the max you can use like 1 link 2 in order to get value instead of having to use 5 monsters. But that's perfectly fine because there are a lot of decks that summon link 2 monsters. So this card is actually insane. If it's link summoned, you can negate the effects of all face-up monsters your opponent controls. So if you time it correctly with Masquerena, you can actually disrupt your opponent very well with this card. And it's also unaffected by your opponent's activated effects that do not target it. So unless they play a targeting effect, which some people avoid because it's been a trend that targeting effects are bad, but this card actually makes the opposite happen. It can only be affected by targeting effects. So it is unaffected by stuff like droplets, unaffected by stuff like Dark Ruler no more. Your opponent can't do anything to it. And also, once per turn, when your opponent activates a card or effect that includes an effect that special summons a monster from the graveyard, then you can just negate the activation. So this card not only makes Masquerena a disruption, but it's also a disruption both ways on its own, because it negates everything your opponent has on the field when it's link summoned. It can also disrupt an opponent's graveyard effect, which is actually very relevant this format because of stuff like Drytron, and it's also very hard to deal with. So it's a 3k beater that is unaffected by anything that doesn't target. So when you can combo Masquerena with this, if you have the space in your extra deck in pretty much anything that you're playing that is not full control and can actually get a lot of monsters on the field, then I highly suggest playing this, and I highly suggest you pick this card up now because its pre-order price is actually very reasonable, and I have a strong feeling that it's going to go up insanely high price eventually. So yep, that's the deck, guys. Ojama's just a fun favorite deck. If you're a fan of the deck, then I think it's time for you to dust off your decks because you're going to enjoy playing them. You have new support, you have new ways to play it. You don't have to follow this build. You can actually play ABCs with it, you can play Armed Dragons with it. There are so many versions, so much support for any version you like. So choose the version you love the most, figure out a build. We can discuss in the comments below for other decks because I think this deck has a lot of variety with the support it has that can actually make different plays happen. So if you have any suggestions, comment down below. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming videos, and we'll see you next time.